Hi, I'm Julia, and whenever I think of Japan, my mind goes to the most prominent things. I think of Japanese cuisine, I think of Japanese game companies like Nintendo or Sony, and I think of Japanese films made by Studio Ghibli. But at the forefront of all of it, the part of Japanese culture that stands out to me the most are the commercials. I don't care what's being sold. I'm in. Japanese and Eastern cultures have influenced a lot of different aspects of Western life, just as Western cultures influence a lot of different parts of Asian life throughout the past century. The only difference being that one was a little bit more aggressive in its influence with a lot of proxy wars happening, especially towards the second half of the 20th century. At any rate, Japan has been influential in the United States in many ways aside from purely cultural services. As we're one of Japan's major trading partners, the US has been able to export a lot of food to Japan and make profit, and also import amazing new technologies and household names like Hondas. But as important as Japan is on the world stage, it's been dealing a lot lately with the issue of population decrease. Why is it happening? Why does it matter? But most importantly, what happens next? Here's the issue with Japan's population. Following World War II, both Germany and Japan were able to rebound their economies in what historians call the economic miracles. Japan was occupied by US troops for over 4 years, which, as much as I joke about the US, really helped push Japan into the future. Old industrial leaders were purged, trade unions were given more power, women were finally allowed to vote, and the Japanese side even created a new constitution which incorporated a lot of democratic ideals. That being said, one of the reasons in which the US was so insistent on helping wasn't out of pure goodwill like Uncle Sam would have you believe, but rather because of the Truman Doctrine or our containment policy. This was all part of the US plan to contain communism, and it worked in Japan's favor. The next few decades, as Japan expanded alongside West Germany, many new industries were pushed, with technology being at the forefront of it all. What we observed happen, though, is that following the war, the total fertility rate of women sharply declined, slightly rebounding in the 70s. Since then, the total fertility rate, or TFR, has dropped to 1.368 births per woman, which is well below the 2.1 standard for the world. To put things in perspective, the US is at 1.64 births per woman, while Germany is at 1.53 births per woman, so Japan's pretty low there. Population itself has actually started to decrease after it peaked in 2008 at 128 million, with the current population of Japan being 125 million, and that number only expected to go down in the coming years. I put up all these statistics to show the facts. Japan's too good for its own good. With the increase of industry following the war and the subsequent increase of the economy, Japan did what any other developed country would: they outsourced labor. This meant that Japan itself was on its way to becoming a service-based economy rather than an industrial one, with a majority of its citizens getting some form of higher education, including women. While women receiving education is generally accepted in the developed world, Japan lies in this unique crossroads where certain government policies and general cultural values work against women. With many women becoming more prominent in the Japanese workforce, it leaves a lot less time for them to be mothers, with many of these women delaying childbirth until later in life after they've established a steady income. The result of this, statistically speaking, are less childbirths, which results in a lower fertility rate, which results in a declining population. Adding insult to injury, many women just straight up choose to not have children, knowing that they can't work a job and raise a child. A study done in 2013 found that on average, men spend roughly an hour doing domestic work around the house, while women spend 4 times that, both of them in addition to their full-time jobs. Now, Julia, I hear you cry. This is from 2013. Surely things have changed with COVID. Well, according to a study done in 2020 by a team of international scientists, it hasn't. The study reports that the percentage of women who perceive that they spend more time on housework and childcare was significantly greater than that of men after adjusting for work-related factors. So simply put, the unequal amount of work between men and women in the domestic household is a contributing factor to declining fertility rates, and it's not something that's going to change anytime soon either. But it's not like it's all the male partner's fault or Japanese culture's fault. It's also part equally the government's fault. Following World War II, a lot of countries accepted the nuclear family model, which involved the dad being the breadwinner, the mom being the stay-at-home domestic worker, the children going to school, and everybody was having such a peachy time. I wonder what could go wrong. Well, as it turns out, a lot of things. Japan adopted this from the West, and obviously it changed with the increase of women's rights. While there still are remnants of the nuclear family in the US suburbs in the form of soccer moms, the amount of women who have gotten higher education has dramatically increased here in the United States. And while the same is true for Japan, their way of handling this increase didn't pan out quite as smoothly as the United States did.
These babies are the lucky ones. Their mothers managed to secure them a place at the most popular daycare center in the neighborhood. Orie Takezaki is one of the 200 mothers still on the waiting list.
This was filmed a decade ago and it somehow manages to only have gotten worse with COVID. One of the major issues with relying on childcare is that it's simply not consistent. Daycares have been routinely reported to be understaffed, with wait lists overfilling, not to mention the high cost of operating one, which comes out of the government's funding for childcare. What I'm not saying is that the United States has an awesome childcare program, because spoiler, we don't. I'm willing to say that leaving your child at home locked watching pandas wrestle is both cheaper and more productive than daycares. But the United States is a bit more manageable considering that we don't have Japan's other problem, old people. And as much as I love TikTok grandpas, old folks have definitely created a burden on Japan's economy as government spending for elder care has increased with an aging population. In ways it's almost kind of ironic. Japan so far has healthcare that the average life expectancy is well into the 80s. But because of this, the increase of elderly population also comes at an increased economic cost. Japan's metaphorically shooting itself in the foot because their healthcare is so good, but it's also not at the same time because their healthcare is so good. Damn it, Japan. So let's just have a standard married heterosexual Japanese couple, right? They have parents who are put into socially funded assisted living homes, taking them out of the picture. Now, where it becomes tricky is regarding children. Because of the high amount of elders, a lot of government spending goes towards elder care, often neglecting child care. For example, in 2018, expenses for the aging population totaled 21.5% of Japan's GDP. This includes pensions, welfare, and health subsidies, but even taking pensions and welfare out of the picture, that still leaves 9.5% of GDP spending for elderly healthcare alone. Child subsidies, which include a limited maternity leave, were on the other hand only 1.5% that same year. And obviously, if a woman doesn't want to give up a job to have a child, she'll postpone it until later in life, which reduces the amount of children and the chances of having children. In essence, the Japanese government needs to find a way to increase birth rates, and that's where the issue arises. It's a tricky situation. Fascist governments use different forms of ideology to promote pro-natalist policies, and in reality it's all ill-intentioned just to expand the nationalistic regime of a country. Now, immigration would seem like a great solution, but aside from the fact that Japan has some of the highest immigration restrictions in the world, the only other place in which we've seen immigration help a declining birth rate was in Germany. The catch is, a majority of their immigration comes from refugees from the Middle East and more recently, Ukrainian refugees. And something tells me that the Japanese government isn't too keen on accepting refugees, as last year 10,000 people applied for asylum in Japan, and out of those 10,000 people, only 74 were accepted. So what other solutions are there? Well, pronatal policies which encourage birth have had some success in recent years. Sweden, for example, has a paid 16 months of parental leave. And while this is obviously great, it's also costly for governments. But because Japan's already spending so much money on elderly care, a solution would seem pretty obvious. Reallocating money from Japan's elderly. Money could be reallocated from supporting elder care to supporting child care, which would in turn encourage more natural births. Now, how would Japan do this? Well, one theory promotes the use of robots. So right now, throughout Japan, a lot of automation and robots are being tested to see what tasks they can accomplish. The issue? Robots are expensive. They require maintenance. They're prone to failure. They're hard to maneuver and operate. And one of the most recent care robots, Pepper, has definitely murdered at least 5 elders in his short life. That smile is not natural. An effective initiative Japan could take isn't even necessarily an economic one. It might be difficult to pull off, but in doing so, it might drastically help the decrease of birth rates rebound. So I've already mentioned how a lot of women are socially conditioned to be domestic workers, which might hinder their eagerness to have children, as it would require them leaving their jobs to take care of the child. Do I think that this social phenomenon will dramatically change within our lifetimes? No. What can change is how the government responds to it. Obviously, the government could just increase taxes and use that to fund childcare, but as I've already mentioned, the childcare system is pretty unreliable. And we've already seen other countries with a smaller budget for elder care expand their government spending for maternity care. And with COVID already having people used to working from home, it would only make sense for Japanese lawmakers to work with employers to not only extend maternity leave, but also to implement work from home options, which would then reduce the mother's need for sending their child to a daycare. Currently, Japanese maternity leave ranges from 6 weeks before birth to 8 weeks after birth. Expanding this window and implementing more work options will not only ease the burden of mothers trying to find daycare, but can also encourage women who are postponing to have children to just go ahead and have them, which can help increase birth rates. This can then ensure that women will still be able to work, it'll keep the government spending for elder care intact, and hopefully it'll help increase population. And this isn't something that's only limited to Japan. The US could definitely use some laws for maternity leave, but we're too busy with this.
To determine whether the content that elicits a pupil dilation should be amplified by the algorithm. Can you tell me that?
Anyway, yeah, that's a video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.